Hey, it's Scott from FamilyWheels.ca with another car review for your growing family, and this is the 2019 Hyundai Veloster Turbo. Okay, so you got a couple of kids, maybe a dog, you need to get the groceries, you got to fit the sports gear in, maybe even tackle a few longer trips. What you need is the versatility of a four-door hatchback, but you're still young, you love to drive, and you long for the spirit of a two-door sports coupe. So what do? Well, I present to you the three-door sports hatchback. Yes, the Veloster is a three-door, and I guess if we count the hatchback door, it's a four-door. So cool idea, right? You get the third door when you need it and two-door sports car vibes when you want it. But how practical is it really? And can you actually manage the needs of a growing family in a car of this size? And is the fun factor enough to make it worth the compromise? Let's go check it out. So Hyundai launched the Veloster back in 2011, and the reaction was a bit mixed. I know amongst my circle of friends, people were excited about the idea of a new and potentially hot hatchback, but what we got in the first gen Veloster was a bit lackluster. Some people loved it, no doubt, and the concept was certainly unique, but it definitely didn't light everyone's fire. Fast forward to 2019, and Hyundai have now released the second gen of the Veloster, and the impressions are improved. Plus, with the introduction of the very buzzworthy high-performance Veloster N, the car has gained a lot of credibility with the driving enthusiast community. Now, unfortunately, this model that we have is not that 275 horsepowered N version of the car, but also not the mild-mannered base Veloster that puts out just 147 horses. This is the right-in-the-middle Veloster Turbo that gives a nice, drivable, sporty 201 horses and 195 pound-feet of torque. It's available with a 7-speed dual-clutch transmission, or, like we have here, a 6-speed manual, which, if you ask me, is definitely the way to go. The clutch does feel a little long and the throws of the stick aren't as tight as I wish they'd be, but it's still really fun to drive. It has two modes, normal and sport, and when you hit the sport button, you get a nice little kick from it. It makes the car seem a bit snappier. Normal mode feels a bit more subdued and maybe a bit more comfortable for daily driving. This model, the Turbo, gets some perks that the base model doesn't, like LED headlights, a proximity key, and the option to upgrade to performance-oriented tires. You can also upgrade to the Turbo Tech package, which gets you infinity speakers, they sound great, and an 8-inch touchscreen instead of the standard 7-inch, rain-sensing wipers, and a heads-up display. Now for me, the sound system seems worth it, but the rest I could probably do without. The base model Veloster starts at 20,999 Canadian. This guy that we're driving is in at 28,899 before taxes and fees, and the Veloster N starts at 34,999 Canadian, and Hyundai are saying to expect 7.8 liters for 100 kilometers in this model, but in our real world tests we averaged a bit more like 9.4 liters for 100 kilometers, but I'll admit that the sport button was on more often than not. Back to how the Veloster looks here for a second. Like I was mentioning before, I think it's really improved over the previous generation. It's still a bit quirky, but the car is sleeker and it's less in your face with its styling, while still maintaining its individuality. I like the big front grille and the stance of the car. I love the black rims and the exhaust tips coming out the center of the rear end, and all these little red accents that the Turbo model gets are a nice hint at the performance that's hidden inside without being too over the top. It wasn't an immediate love the first time I laid eyes on it, but it's definitely grown on me. The red accented theme from the outside continues into the interior, where things are basically on par with what you'd expect. It comes across as pragmatic with a touch of cool. Like, the exterior red accents tip you off that the car is somewhat souped up, but not at the cost of practicality. The amount of storage and layout of the console is fine. You don't get a ton of space, but remember, it is a small car. In the back, we get this center console between the seats instead of a fifth seat belt. It's a fine idea, but I'm not sure how practical it is, especially when you're considering how it would work with kids. If you only have one or two, okay, it makes sense. Driving position feels great, and I found it easy to find my place in the car, despite the seat being 100% manually adjustable. Everything you need from here is nicely within reach. All the gauges and readouts are clean and sporty, but also straightforward and easy to read. Nothing confusing or difficult to navigate here. Controls for seat and steering wheel heaters are right where they should be, as was the start button, and thank you Hyundai for the handbrake right here. Sunroof, it's not huge, but I'm glad it's there. And one thing that stuck out to me, it's so funny to reach for your window controls in the driver's door and find 3 switches instead of 2 or 4. I mean, it's not a big deal either way, and it's obvious why it's like that. The car has 3 doors, but it's just one of those things that made me go, oh yeah, every time I used it. In our decibel test, the Veloster came in at 65 decibels on 100 kilometers, and that's on dry roads with those performance-oriented tires I was mentioning. Infotainment system is great. Apple CarPlay and Android Auto come standard, and the button layout works really well here. The touchscreen is responsive, but I find that I barely ever use it because all of the buttons are so easy to reach and use. Bluetooth connectivity here was great, never had any issues with it dropping out, and the call quality was good. I also love the wireless charging pad. It's a big convenience item here. It's one of those things that I didn't really think I'd care about until I used one. Wireless charging in your car is awesome. Just imagine getting in every time you drop your phone in it and it charges. Like literally you get to the end of the day and your phone has so much battery left. It's an underrated thing. I also really like how the home screen shows you 2 things at once, both navigation and entertainment, for example, and the steering wheel controls are well laid out and usable. All around, this is an area that Hyundai excels. Nothing too flashy, just good looking, well working, reliable stuff. Standardized rear-facing car seat test, as you might expect. It's a small car, so not great. 29 inches from the back of the front passenger seat to the glove box, so not terrible for the size of car, but I'd hesitate to put any full-sized adults back here for too long. Kids maybe, but the space makes the most sense for occasional short to mid-length trips. Standardized trunk test, actually pretty decent. The trunk is quite deep and everything fit relatively well and easy in here, and we were still able to manage to keep this privacy cover intact when closing the hatch. You take this out, you get even more space, and the rear seats are also 60-40 split folding, so you have some flexibility there should you find yourself wanting to move anything a little bigger. And all of this brings us to the real clincher here for me, the 3 doors. When I was showing the car to people over the week, even though it's been on the market for nearly a decade, people were surprised to see this. I feel like it's a statement thing, but in reality, for me, it's just more frustrating than anything else. Like, I would go to put Sloan, my 2-year-old daughter, in the car seat on the passenger side, and then go around to put something in on the driver's side and just get frustrated that there isn't a door there. I mean, yeah, I could slide the driver's seat forward, but if I wanted to do that, I'd be looking at an actual 2-door. As well, putting passengers in through here would mean that they would need to slide across this plastic console between the seats, which doesn't seem like the easiest or most convenient thing to do. Again, maybe fine for kids, but I wouldn't ask any of my adult friends to do it. The whole thing kind of feels like a compromise that just doesn't really work. I mean, I'd love for Hyundai to turn the Veloster into a true GTI or Focus ST competitor with 4 doors and a little more power. Now, there is the Elantra GT. It has the same power as this car, and it gets the 4 doors. But give me that with that 275 horsepower engine from the Veloster N, and now we're talking. For the record, that car does exist. It's called the i30N, but for the moment, it's only available in Europe. Hyundai, if you're listening, please bring that car here. So all in all, it's a decent little car. Cheap to own and run, reliable, and a lot of fun to drive. But I think it'd be a stretch to own one for a large family. think I'd find myself getting frustrated at the door situation more often than not. But that said, if it was a second car for my family, and most of the time it was just me driving it, maybe commuting or whatever, and perhaps just taking the odd passenger on occasion, it could work. And the bonus there is that you would love your drive almost every day. Like I've been saying, this car is a lot of fun to drive. Imagining that N version with an extra 75 horsepower gets me excited, and driving it might actually put me over the top. I think if you were looking at actually owning a Veloster, this one is great, but I'd want to know what that extra 75 horses felt like, just to be sure. For FamilyWheels.ca, I'm Scott.